Okay, I think we are live. Welcome to our 11 Days of Global Unity Summit panel on disarmament. We're excited to have with us Alan Ware, Jonathan Granoff, and Jana Larson. My name is Rick Ulfik, and I am founder of We the World and the We campaign at we.net. And I'm the co-creator of 11 Days of Global Unity with my dear friend Troy Lush. This is our 17th anniversary. It's amazing. And I want to thank Jim Garrison and Rick Buckley, along with Ubiquity University and Humanity Rising, for broadcasting all of the 11 Days of Global Unity Summit panels on each of these 11 themes. And today, again, is on disarmament. You can find out about all of these 11 days broadcasts and other kinds of events by going to we.net. And we invite you to collaborate with us as a volunteer or an organization partner as well. Since these 11 campaigns go all year long, you can get involved at any time. Just go to we.net. So I'd like to bring in our interim coordinator for our campaign for disarmament for We the World, that is Jana Larson. Hi, Jana, and it's good to see you. And do you want to just say any quick welcome to folks for our disarmament campaign? You have been instrumental in connecting with so many of the wonderful volunteers and our branches in so many different parts of the world now, not just Botswana, which we've had a branch in for like over 5 years now, but some of the other places. You want to mention some of them?
Yes, well, it's all part of our We Can program, the We Change Agent Network. And when I started doing the volunteer program, we only had Angelina, poor lonely Angelina in Botswana, all by herself. And so we just got the volunteer program going and started getting people from a lot of different places. Not everybody is still with us from all these different places, but Africa has been strong. So we have Ali and Mohammed in Egypt. They're STEM school students. And then we have Didier in Burundi. He's a lawyer and an activist. We saw Tumani in Tanzania this morning, who received a scholarship, and Eric in Rwanda. And so, yeah, it's just been great being able to find a place for all these activists, these young people that have so much enthusiasm and energy to make actual change in their communities.
Exactly. And don't forget Joseph Akinola in Nigeria.
Oh, yes, my buddy. How could I forget Joseph in Nigeria?
Yeah, exactly. And and everybody calls you Mama Jana. I really like that. All right.
Well,
so
yes. Thank you.
Sure. So let's get on with the show here. And we have a lot to talk about with regard to human security and disarmament. That is our theme today. And to start off, I want to bring in our dear friend, Jonathan Granoff, who has been part of We the World for many years. In fact, Jonathan was one of the honorary co-chairs of the launch of 11 Days of Global Unity, along with Hazel Henderson, Jane Goodall, Deepak Chopra, Marianne Williamson, and Desmond Tutu made a video, and we had this incredible launch, and we've been doing it strong each year for 17 years. So Jonathan Granoff is president of the Global Security Institute. He's an attorney, an author, and international advocate, emphasizing the legal and ethical dimensions of human development and security with a specific focus on advancing the rule of law to address international security and the threats posed by nuclear weapons. He serves on numerous government and governing and advisory boards, including the Nonpartisan Security Group, the Lawyers Committee on Nuclear Policy, Fortune Forum, Jane Goodall Institute, a long list. And as I mentioned, he's on the advisory board of We the World. Welcome to the broadcast, Jonathan Granoff, and you have something special to start us off with, right?
There's a wonderful publication that We the World shares with the world called Trends. It's available at trends.we.net. And the edition that's just come out has a prayer from my heart to the hearts of everybody. And I'd like to begin our session with that prayer, because the substance of how to bring skillful means into action to address the immoral, illegal, irrational threat of nuclear weapons has to begin with the heart. Because if it's only the heart without the hand, it will wither. But if we bring the heart and the hand together, that's how change is made. So I want to share something from my heart. And this is from Trends, which We the World has just published.
Right. And I want to say the full name of the magazine is Trends in Global Grassroots Organizing. And as Jonathan said, it's trends.we.net. And this is from the latest edition, which you can find and download and subscribe to by going to trends.we.net. So we're on the disarmament page. The magazine is actually laid out according to all of the 11 themes, which include things like peace, but also economic justice, environment, human rights, women, unity, interdependence, and 11 of these. So here we go with this this inclusion here. And Jonathan, would you like to read this poem? And we'll watch
Thank you.
As you are.
Thank you very much. And scroll it down as I read it.
Exactly.
That Nagasaki be the last use of a nuclear weapon. That weapons never be used. That nuclear weapons never be used again. Oh God, bless and guide us. To eliminate these devices, the apex of creative evil, and all devices of massive, indiscriminate death, please guide us. Each of us came into this world responding to our mother's love. Each came seeking family and love. Each of us became identified with nation, race, gender, religion, and forgot we are one human family, and every person is as precious as we are. Still, in the stillness in our hearts remains a light of the soul, seeking, resonating, and longing for that love that brought us here into this world. That love awakens and informs our universal humanity and awakens hearts without borders. Intelligence has given us insights into the wondrous secrets of matter, energy, space, and time. Fear, ignorance, arrogance, pride, hatred, and prejudice have led us to use these insights to create devices of incomprehensible power to inflict indescribable, horrific suffering. Please, dear Lord of all, creator of every life, every heartbeat, every moment, every leaf, blade of grass, every one of us, and universes and galaxies beyond counting, glorious source of love and life, forgive us for forgetting you and your blessings. Friend within all friendship, love within all loves, life within all lives, witness of all and everything, bless us with the wisdom that comes from compassion, such that we will skillfully eliminate these devices of death and use the gift of intelligence to serve, to heal, sustain, harmonize, understand, and glorify you, our humanity, and honor your creation. To end the suffering of poverty, to protect nature, to love one another, remove the ignorance from our hearts, grant us hearts of gratitude, courage, and love such that we will not falter in bringing peace and justice, beauty and unity to the human family. Help us eliminate these devices of death and the motives from which we create them. Please guide us in beautiful ways of peace, such that we can be witnesses of your goodness. Guide us with compassion, kindness, and love, that we might become fully human, and all praises are yours. Amen.
That's so beautiful. And you can see at the bottom there, it's the next page has to do with no first use global, which we will actually probably talk about today. So thank you so much, Jonathan, and we will come back to you in a moment. Now I'd like to bring in Alan Ware, who is our other panelist for today. Alan Ware won a number of major awards, including the Right Livelihood Award, which is also known as the Alternative Nobel Award, and the United Nations International Year for Peace Award. Alan is coordinator of parliamentarians for nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament. He's director of the Basel Peace Office, coordinator of the World Future Council Peace and Disarmament Program, international representative for the New Zealand Peace Foundation, co-founder and webmaster of Unfold Zero, co-founder and webmaster of Move the Nuclear Weapons Money, and coordinating committee member of Abolition 2000, which We the World is one of the members of, and we are an originating member of Abolition 2000. Actually, we did it right at when it happened, when it started. So welcome to the broadcast, Alan Ware. So good to have you, and so good to see you. I think the last time we saw each other was in New York when we were counting and moving the nuclear weapons money, right?
Well, thank you so much, Rick, firstly for incredible initiatives of We the World and 11 Days of Global Unity. And a huge thank you to Jana also for involvement in that. And also a big thank you to Jonathan for the opening, who's basically outlined it's not just what we do, but how we do it, which is so important. And how we're acting for a better world, as I said, it's not just the actions we do, but the heart and the spirit that we're taking in, to make the world a better place. And the prayer that Jonathan started with gave a beautiful rendition of that, and connected that also with what we're trying to transform from, which is the threat to humanity. And today we're talking about the threat to humanity and civilization from nuclear weapons, but it's equally true with the other key existential threats to the planet, such as climate change, the changing acidity of the oceans, the unsustainable development and abuse of resources in the world. So these are all connected, and we act on them through love, through hope, and through passion, and our belief, our optimism that we can change the world. So I'm going to be talking today about some of the initiatives and actions to take forward this, with a particular focus on at the international level and through the United Nations. And then I look forward to the discussion. I'm going to be sharing my screen with a PowerPoint, because there's a few initiatives here that you might be interested in. And I'm just starting here. And as Rick mentioned, I have spent some of my time in New York. I'm originally from New Zealand. I've lived a large part of my adult life in New York. I'm now living in the Czech Republic, but I see myself pretty much as a planetary citizen. And I think more and more, the approach we need to take has to be a shared responsibility in connection with everybody, no matter which country we're from, which race, which religion, what age we are. There is these planetary processes, and these planetary processes can work. That's what I'm going to be focusing mostly on when I'm talking about preventing nuclear war and abolishing nuclear weapons. I'm not going to talk much about the problem that we know. We have a lot of deep analysis on the 13,000 nuclear weapons that are around, on all the reasons why nuclear armed states are holding onto them, on the excessive and absurd amount of money and people and financial resources going into nuclear weapons. I'm not really going to talk much about that. I'm going to talk more about what are some things people are doing. I'll look at 4 different categories here, and I'll go through them quickly because we want to have time for discussion. Firstly, I'll look at some of the actions to prevent nuclear war, to reduce the risks of nuclear war, and particularly this new campaign at No First Use Global, which is building links around the world of people who are working on nuclear risk reduction measures. Then I'll look a bit United Nations and nuclear disarmament and a couple of the key initiatives that have been coming through the United Nations. And most of these have been done in cooperation of civil society and governments and the United Nations. Then really important, linking the issues, particularly nuclear disarmament and climate action, and how we can build cooperation. And then lastly, I'll end up with a global appeal that people can join if they wish. So starting off, preventing a nuclear war. Well, there's a whole range of ways of reducing nuclear risks. And de-alerting, taking the weapons off alert, building better connections between those with nuclear weapons. But one of the key things, which is to lower the role of nuclear weapons in political and military doctrines in order to pave the way for the nuclear armed states to agree to eliminating nuclear weapons. At the moment, most of the nuclear armed states hold on to a range of reasons for nuclear weapons: to deal with conventional attacks or threats, to deal with the threats of chemical weapons and biological weapons, even to deal with possible attacks in cyberspace. And if nuclear weapons are ascribed a role for all these different types of security threats, it's very unlikely that nuclear armed states are going to sit down and negotiate their elimination. So a first step is to reduce the role of nuclear weapons, that to only address other nuclear weapons, and to declare or to create agreements that you'll never be the first to use nuclear weapons. So that's what this platform is, No First Use Global. The key phrase is don't even think about starting a nuclear war. You notice the little sign there. It's a bit of a takeoff of these don't even think about parking here signs in New York. And there are a number of different ways of doing this, whether bilateral agreements between countries, unilateral. I'm not going to go through all those. It's really that there is a campaign happening. There are a lot of initiatives in the US Congress, in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe. There are civil society initiatives and letters and social media actions. So there's a lot happening now on this. And I think with all this attention, we have a possibility of success. Now to move to the UN and nuclear disarmament, looking at how do we move towards a comprehensive prohibition and elimination of nuclear weapons. And we had a really good start, with the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which was adopted in July 2017. Again, this was an initiative of civil society working in cooperation with like-minded member states. So it's a great step forward. The treaty provides for those states who sign on to it a comprehensive prohibition of nuclear weapons. So it's a very good and welcome initiative. The problem with it, though, is that none of the nuclear armed or allied countries have joined. And so treaties only bind those who join them. So they are not bound by the regulations in this treaty. And secondly, so far, none of the ratifying states have adopted implementing measures to restrict the activities of the nuclear armed states, such as banning transit or banning the financing of nuclear weapons. So far, it hasn't managed to put any further legal restraints on the nuclear weapon states. So are there other ways of putting legal restraints on the nuclear weapon states? And yes, there are. And here, there's a body of law which is already restraining the threat or use of nuclear weapons. Here, the laws of warfare, and this is primarily the UN Charter, and all the nuclear armed states are members of the UN Charter, so they're bound by this law, including Article 2 of the UN Charter, which prohibits the threat or use of force in international relations, and Article 33, which requires disputes be settled by peaceful means. Also, there's the body of international humanitarian law, which is what is permitted or prohibited in armed conflict. And this is a body that's been developed over years and years or centuries, but it's accepted by all the nuclear armed states. They've written these laws into their military law manuals. Here you see one from the United States. And this prescribes what can happen once you're in armed conflict. Now, when this body of law is applied to nuclear weapons, what do we see? The nuclear weapons, the threat or use is prohibited, and there is also an obligation to achieve their complete elimination. And this was what we found when the case was taken to the International Court of Justice in 1996. This is what the court determined. So this is very, very strong law that we can use with regards to putting more legal constraints on the nuclear weapon states and the obligation to achieve nuclear disarmament. And it's supported also by human rights law. And human rights law, people know the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And human rights law, there's a very strong protection of the right to life. Article 3 of the Universal Declaration and Article 6 of the International Covenant. And in 2018, the UN Human Rights Committee affirmed that the threat or use of nuclear weapons is incompatible with this right to life, and that countries have an obligation under human rights law to address the human impact of nuclear weapons and achieve the elimination of nuclear weapons. So even though this new treaty at the UN doesn't specifically apply to the nuclear weapon states, they don't escape the law, and we can use this law to move towards help prevent use of nuclear weapons and move towards elimination. Now, I was going to touch on two other key aspects. One is climate nuclear cooperation, or the climate nuclear nexus. The issue of climate probably captures the attention of more people in the world than the issue of nuclear weapons. It particularly captures the attention of youth, who are getting really engaged in this issue. But there are a lot of connections between climate change and nuclear weapons. Both issues are transborder and transgenerational in their impact. Both require international cooperation and the building of common security. It's difficult to achieve success when you're only working one nation or another nation. We need to work on international practices. Both are conflict escalators, and both require shifting resources, divesting from the nuclear and fossil fuel industries and reinvesting in peace, climate protection, and sustainable development. So there's a lot of connections between the two issues, and it's ways of building cooperation between the movements, and that will help both campaigns. These are highlighted a lot in the new parliamentary handbook. It's called Parliamentary Handbook on Disarmament for Security and Sustainable Development. It's available online in both English and French, and it has specific chapters on the connections between disarmament, climate, and sustainable development. Highlights effective policies, and also shows what parliamentarians in particular are doing and how we can strengthen policies and expand them. So that's one thing. Another connection between the climate nuclear nexus I mentioned is on the financing. And here in the United nuclear weapons, there's nearly $100 billion per year spent on modernizing, developing, deploying nuclear weapons. Those resources need to be used instead to address other issues, including protection of the climate and sustainable development. So there's a global campaign, movethenuclearweaponsmoney.org, and Rick knows about this because we did do this action, which is we printed off 1 million of these. This is $1 million. 1 million times 1 million is 1 trillion. That's the nuclear weapons budget for 10 years. That's what it's been spent on at the moment. This is what it should be spent on instead. And we tried counting it out. We had a whole lot of people come in, spend a week, counting out the money. We never got to 1 million of these. It's just far too many. And we took them from missiles, put them into big baskets for the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. We totally filled up the huge baskets. The room was overflowing, but we still couldn't count out all the money from the nuclear weapons. It was just so much. So the money is there. So now we're looking at, well, how can we move it? And one way is through legislative action, such as the Smarter Approach to Nuclear Expenditure Act in the United States, or the Invest in Cures Before Missiles Act, also the United States. Another is to look at our investments, whether an individual, a city, a university, a pension fund, a government, a religious organization. We can look at where our money is being invested, stop investing in the nuclear weapons industry. And it's pretty easy to do. There's really only about 27, 28 corporations that have any significant involvement in the industry. So stop investing in those and put the investments into better places. So we can shift the nuclear weapons money. And already we have a number of governments who have done it, a number of universities have done it, a number of cities have done it, individuals, pension funds. There's a lot of, there's a momentum that we can keep moving. Okay, and we also do some social media promotion. So here, for example, is a former commander of the Royal Navy from a nuclear submarine in the UK, who says we shouldn't be spending money on renewing the UK Trident weapon system. We should be putting that money into human security. And we have a lot of young people also involved, particularly ones who are involved in other issues, seeing how the money reinvested to help climate, public health can help support on other issues. Another way of connecting, and I'm coming near the end of the presentation, is an initiative which was inspired by the World Court case against nuclear weapons, which was a civil society-led case. Young people are now looking at taking a similar case on the issue of climate change. So they were doing a lot of workshops, webinars, consulting with those of us who were very involved in the nuclear weapons case in order to make sure that they can get the case to the International Court of Justice and win the case, and that will be effective. So that's an exciting connection also. And I said finally I'd end in an appeal. So this is, there are a few ways I showed before that people can take action, but one very easy one is to endorse the appeal Protect People and the Planet, the appeal for a nuclear weapons-free world, which includes the 3 key aspects: prevent a nuclear war through nuclear risk reduction measures, commit to the total elimination of nuclear weapons, and shift the resources from nuclear weapons to better things. And that's available at unfoldzero.org. So thank you very much. There is a number of organizations, just a few of them, that are working along these lines. And we look forward to the discussion and to helping people feel empowered and hopeful that we can change the world. We will be able to achieve a nuclear weapons-free world, and we will be able to stabilize the climate. Thank you very much.
That's so beautiful. Thank you so much, Alan. It occurs to me that all of the work that we're all doing here can come together to make a shift in our culture. And maybe Jonathan will talk about that a little bit in terms of human security, because I know that a lot has to do with law and legislative action. And we know that law and legislative action and treaties and everything are only as good as the culture and what the people really are, what they feel is normal and acceptable. And that's this cultural shift that we're all trying to make. And I always talk about making that shift towards we consciousness, where the well-being and health of each and every member of society, including with the expanded concept of we non-human members of society, our animals and plants and all of life, and the ecosystems that support life, where the health and well-being of every member of society is considered to be essential to the health and well-being and the survival of the whole, of all of us. So making that cultural shift and doing that seems to go along with all of these kind of on the ground ideas that you've been saying, Ellen. So thank you for that. And Jonathan, what would you like to say about human security? How does that fit in with this, and how we all think of it as people and as leaders in our society and government and policymakers?
We use the term myth in two different ways. There are wisdom myths that are useful in understanding the human psyche. They involve archetypes and they're valuable. Then we use the term myth in terms of superstitious, unrealistic thinking. And there's two myths that our major institutions are operating under. The way in which we heat our homes, drive our cars, produce our food is based on the myth that the resources of the planet are infinite, and that we have created an economic engine that benefits from the excessive exploitation of the regenerative processes of nature. So we're actually changing the very climate of the planet Earth and rendering it unsustainable for human beings. We put the phytoplankton, which provides 50 to 70% of our oxygen and depends on the pH of the oceans, at risk, and thus puts our own breathing at risk. And we've incentivized the process of exploiting the regenerative processes of nature. So that is a myth that our economic system is causing slow burn of the planet. It's unrealistic and it's mythical thinking. So the more we improve our economic engine, if we don't change our values and our perspective, the more we're going to be destroying other species and the very life of ourselves. That's driven by greed. There's another set of myths that are driven by irrational fear. And nuclear weapons are the apex of the expression of that fear-driven, greed-fueled process of creating weapons, which the more we perfect the weapons, the less security we obtain. So in the debates where security is discussed amongst the major powers, there are lots of people who want to take care of gender equity, feeding people, housing people, protecting the climate, taking care of health. They know that pandemics don't have passports. They know that we have to change the way we heat our homes and drive our cars. They know that we can't keep depleting the topsoil. They know we can't burn the rainforests. They know all these things. They know we need social development. We, in fact, have 17 metrics called the Sustainable Development Goals that all the countries in the world have agreed upon. But is there one minister of the Sustainable Development Goals in one country? No. What do we have? We have almost $2 trillion a year being spent on pursuing security through military means. And we're involved in improving and making more usable nuclear weapons. And why is this? It's based on a myth that goes back to Roman times, the first major sort of technologically bureaucratized global empire that the West experienced, in which its leaders said, prepare for peace, receive war. Peace creates instability and weakness. Prepare for war, receive peace. Peace through domination and overwhelming power and strength. Look at how successful that was in Vietnam. Look at how successful that was when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan or the United States invaded Afghanistan. Does anyone think it's going to be successful in Kashmir, Palestine, or in our cities? Of course not. So it's an unrealistic, mythical proposal that the more we perfect these weapons of mass destruction, the more security we'll obtain. So in the decision-making, the myth that the military contractors put forward and their think tanks that are driving this and the generals who are flacking for them, they say the precondition for social development and protecting the climate is peace, and peace is obtained by overwhelming military force. The focus is on the nation. The focus is on power. Well, there's another model, and it's called human security. And it's based on the fact that the human family in almost every endeavor of the 21st century is one. The financial systems are one, our health is one, the climate that we depend upon is one, the oceans upon which we depend upon are one. The culture we live in, science, medicine, have all become global. What isn't global is the way security is pursued. Take the arms race between China and the United States. While China is the biggest bank for the United States, we have borrowed over $1.2 trillion from China, and we are its market for the goods and services that it produces. And yet, our militaries are in an arms race, putting us all at risk. So the United Nations General Assembly has extolled the virtues of another model, and it hasn't been expressed publicly the way it should be. It's called human security. And the point of reference of how security is pursued is not the military nation state, but the reality that we face, that we have to protect the climate, we have to protect health, we have to protect the topsoil, we have to protect the rainforest, we have to protect the oceans, we have to protect the financial systems. We have to work as one human family, realistically. So I would say that human security is about moving from mythical thinking to realism. It is not realistic to think that we can continue to depend on threatening the first use of nuclear weapons every day, thousands of people at the ready to annihilate humanity's very future, and think that by accident, design, or madness, it won't happen. It is not realistic to think that we can ignore the treaty commitments that over 191 nations, including 5 nuclear weapon states, have made to negotiate elimination in the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and promote global law and restraint, and ignore commitments that are made. Ignore the unanimous ruling of the International Court of Justice directing the negotiations amongst all states with nuclear weapons to obtain their elimination, and think that we can have an international order of peace and ignore the law. To think that we could ignore the very basis of equity and reason. Imagine if the Biological Weapons Convention said, no country can use smallpox or polio as a weapon, but we'll let 9 countries use the plague as a weapon to obtain international security. We would see how utterly irrational that is, but that's precisely the regime we have with nukes. So it is an affront to reason, law, equity, and security. And there's another model, which is based on realism. So Alan mentioned one of the things, no first use. So some people have criticized our campaign for no first use, saying, well, we want to say no use. Well, of course we do, but no first use, and ideas matter. And so when Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev clearly articulated that the only value of nuclear weapons was to prevent them from being used, that set in motion the very process that has taken us down from over 65,000 nuclear weapons to less than 14,000. That's not an insignificant achievement. If we want to go down to much lower numbers, we have to make it positive law of no first use. Now, some people say, well, that doesn't mean much. Well, it means a great deal. It means that deployments of weapons that are first use weapons, like the intercontinental ballistic missile weapons that are stationary in the United States, in South Dakota, North Dakota, Wyoming, in the West, those about 500 weapons make no sense because they're first strike weapons. It would lower the risk, but more importantly, it would lower the status, the mythical thinking, the mythical sense of potency and security, a false sense of security that nuclear weapons allegedly provide. Nuclear weapons are abhorrent, and for that reason alone, they are unworthy of civilization. And that's why we must move from a paradigm of fear and the pursuit of domination to the reality that we have to cooperate as one human family. That's the message of We the World. That is the message of all of the organizations that we're talking about. The spiritual insight that the human family as one now has become a practical necessity. That's the task of our time. And human security doesn't mean just security for humans, because humans can't live outside of the web of life. We are but one thread in many, many glorious life forms the Creator has gifted. For us to survive, we have to create a thriving, living, diverse, magnificent, blossoming world. We can't pave paradise and try to put in one huge parking lot.
That's for sure. Alan, any comments on what Jonathan or anyone has said?
Well, firstly, a big thank you for Jonathan for starting to demolish some of the myths which are so prevalent in our society. He's starting off with that myth that to protect peace, prepare for war. It's that sort of mentality that's led to 2 world wars and many other conflicts as well. To protect peace, we need to work for peace. We need to construct peace. We need to do that not just by saying no to war, but by looking at how we're going to resolve conflicts, how we're going to meet the challenges, to the world in ways that ensure human security, as Jonathan has put forward, which is so vital, and ensure common security. These 2 terms aren't exactly the same, but they're interlinked. Human security is making sure that every human has their basic needs and is respected, and that the planet itself is respected, that we have a sustainable planet. These are really important parts of security. Common security is looking at how do you actually resolve some of the security threats in ways that ensure that everybody's security, whether it's individual security or nation security or security of peoples like an indigenous peoples or particular race, or security of a religious group. The common security is a way understanding that there are conflicts. We don't all see eye to eye. We don't all have the same ideas. There are going to be conflicts over resources, over ideology. There are going to be many. But common security recognizes that we have these conflicts, but there are ways of resolving those. The United Nations was set up as a common security framework. It didn't just say that the threat or use of war is prohibited in international conflict. It said, here are ways that you can resolve conflicts through mediation, through negotiation, through using regional offices, through international law, and it set up systems to do that. And one of the problems we have is that people don't have enough information about or understanding that these common security mechanisms work. Law works. Law is not just about prescribing what is acceptable and unacceptable behavior. It's actually assisting people to work together, laying down the ways that we interact and how to resolve conflicts. And that happens within our domestic, in our internal countries, where we have, assistance, we have legal mechanisms, we have law that help govern the way that we run our country. Same too in the international field. The law is very much a way of how we govern the world. And when people understand that, they can see that international law is a very positive and a very enabling thing. From my country, in New Zealand, we have used international legal processes many times when we've come into conflict with other countries. We had a case of state-sponsored terrorism in our country. This was the French Secret Service blew up a peace boat, the Green Peace boat, Rainbow Warrior, killed one of the sailors on it. This was a state, like basically invading our country. But we didn't react, in an aggressive way or against France, threatening military buildup against them. We decided to use one of the mechanisms of the United Nations, which was the good offices of the mediation of the Secretary General, and we managed to resolve that dispute. There are so many other disputes that have been resolved through UN mechanisms, whether it's been mediation, negotiation, or the International Court of Justice. We need more publicity about those. We need more education about those. We need, these examples of successful resolution of conflict in our primary schools or elementary schools, our secondary schools, our universities, and particularly our law schools, so that people have a much better understanding that this is a positive, practical, and a realistic way, to govern the world. So I see we have those opportunities. And the fact that we've managed so well, so many times with so little resources for peace, if we invested a little bit more of time, attention, resources into peace processes, invest a little bit more into the United Nations. At the moment, the United Nations annual budget is about the same as the annual budget of the New York Police Force. And look at all the incredibly wonderful things the UN does with that small budget. Imagine if we gave it a little bit more of a budget. Like a 1% of the world's military budget, would be phenomenal. Probably 10% would be better. But I see that peace actually has a very strong force that people don't sort of recognize. And so I'm quite optimistic that the types of things Jonathan has been talking about can actually happen. And in fact, most of the time, most of the people in the world are living peacefully. People generally want to do that. It's of benefit to everybody. Peace is much more beneficial than war. I know someone wrote in the chat box that war makes money, but it really only makes money for the arms manufacturers. Most of the rest of society loses with war, whether it's lives, whether it's like economic, destruction of land, destruction of economic resources, the money that goes into it. So peace is actually much more profitable when we're investing in that. So thank you again for the opportunity to expand a little bit on some of the ideas that Jonathan was mentioning.
Yes, and I want to pick up on what you were just saying there, because one of the things that we do quite a bit with the 11 campaigns for change is we see the interconnections between them all, and the interconnection between economic justice and disarmament is kind of right there. We are living in a highly hierarchical society where there's a huge amount of inequality in terms of wealth and income, and that contributes to the perpetuation of these policies in the government, which reward the war profiteers and the military-industrial complex, right? So I wonder if either of you, maybe Jonathan, if you want to talk about how that works, how these war profiteer manufacturers are purposely located in many states around the United States, for example, and then become something that politicians say, well, we can't stop that because we don't want to lose those jobs and everything. And then, but they're getting the money from all of this, extra income and money that's flowing because of what's happening with inequality, where a lot of this money is going towards lobbying. And so there is that interconnection there between disarmament and economic justice in that sense. What do you think, Jonathan?
The amount of money that the 5 major military contractors have made since 9/11 boggles the imagination. It's public record, and it's in the trillions of dollars with no public debate. Because both political parties have become ransomed by them. and their lobbyists. I recently saw some statistics that for every $2 that they put in lobbying, they make about $200. And it's our taxes they're actually using to lobby to get more money. And then, of course, they fund think tanks that come up with a proliferation of ideas and issues arguing against progress on common security and disarmament. Let me get a grasp of how this works. So I mentioned earlier, there's about 500 intercontinental ballistic missiles in the ground in a bunch of Western states, mainly North, South Dakota, Montana, Wyoming. And these weapons, because they're stationary, are considered to be first strike weapons. Because if there was a nuclear conflict, they would be targets, and thus they're being positioned in these states makes the populations of these states vulnerable to nuclear attack, which they wouldn't be otherwise. Former Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis argued forcefully that we don't need these weapons. In fact, these weapons are provocative and they breed insecurity because they're first strike weapons. Former Secretary of Defense William Perry continues to argue forcefully we should get rid of them. They're very expensive. The reason we don't get rid of them is the amount of money that supports communities in these states that thus buys the votes of their political representatives. Because if they were to close down these facilities and the facilities that house and feed and service the militaries that guard them and take care of them, it would be economically devastating to the economies of those communities. So they spread out, the military contractors intentionally spread out economic interest in their programs such that they can control votes in the Congress. In a sense, it's very much like the mafia does when it wants to take over a neighborhood, going to restaurants and saying, well, you know, you have a security problem, and if you'll give us some money, we'll take care of the problem. Except in this instance, the solution they're proposing to take care of the problem actually makes the people in those districts more vulnerable. They wouldn't be targets but for the weapons. But more importantly, these weapons deployments institutionalize, codify, and strengthen adversity, create fear amongst the rest of the nations in the world, when we need to be creating security and recognizing our common interests. These weapons stimulate similar practices by other nations, thus again, reinforcing adversity and fear. So nuclear weapons are the most obvious and flagrant abuse, but this goes conceptually across the board for military contractors. They have become interconnected with our financial systems and our industrial base. And having said all that, let me just say, because the United States does not have a planned economy, central planning, in the military sector, it's one of the few places where long-range core scientific research and experimentation can take place to the benefit of society. So there have been many things that have come out of these irrational pursuits, which have a section of rationality. So for example, the DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects, is where the internet was created as a way of safeguarding command and control in the event there is a nuclear war, so that there could be communications. And thanks to Al Gore and Bill Clinton, that technology was really harvested from the military-industrial complex to the benefit of all of us today. This internet that we're talking on came out of defense planning. Laser technology came out of defense planning, and numerous medical breakthroughs have come out helping to repair bodies that have been smashed and damaged in irrational wars. But this is not the right way to pursue sustainable economic development, by crumbs coming off the table of the weapons manufacturers. We should be focused on how do we build human security. So yes, there's definitely a relationship between the economics, the voting, and the policies.
Sorry, I had myself muted. Exactly, and I'm wondering if you can both comment on some recent developments that I found to be very striking in this realm. North Korea recently did some ballistic missile testing, and also there's that deal between the US, UK, and Australia on nuclear powered submarines, which seems to me like a sort of a kind of an escalation in a sense, you know, in terms and sort of the opposite direction in from disarmament, and maybe the relationship between those and also the relationship with China. Any comments about that? Probably both of you have a lot to say. Alan, do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, thanks, Rick. Yeah, I come from New Zealand, which was kept out of this new defence relationship between Australia, the UK, and the US, and we're quite happy about that. Because I think, as you mentioned, this new defence relationship is very much a militaristic approach to a security issues. It's not just one that are arising in the East Asia region, and one of those you mentioned is the North Korean nuclear weapons issue. It's not the only one. More is talked about in Australia, our neighbouring country to New Zealand, about the threat of China and the growing conflict between China and US, and China and other East Asian countries. There are territorial disputes in the South China Sea. There are trade disputes. There's a range of issues that are creating quite a complex security dynamic there. And this new deal with Australia, the UK, and the USA is taking a militaristic approach to this, which in my mind is not helpful. What we should be looking at is, again, looking at common security approaches. If there are conflicts, look at what the reasons are. Find ways of having negotiations, of diplomacy. Maybe for some of them, we do need to use legal mechanisms. We have them available. With regards to some of the territorial disputes in the South China Sea, we have the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, which has a disputes resolution process there. There's also the disputes resolution process of the International Court of Justice. So these are part of a common security framework. With regards to the North Korean situation, we have seen sort of like a back and forwards, approach. Sometimes there has been the United States looking at a diplomatic approach with North Korea, and then it flips back into a much more militarist approach. I think what we're seeing from North Korea, the ballistic missile tests, is every time that the North Korea believes that they are being threatened by new militaristic developments, they respond either by doing a nuclear test or firing off a ballistic missile. So how do we address that? Well, there was an initiative that started with the Olympics in 2018. A wonderful initiative launched from the South Korean government, the president, using the Olympics as a way of a face-saving diplomatic approach to start a peace process with North Korea. And it had some successful summits and some agreements, but they've sort of haven't gone anywhere. So the next thing is to take them further. And what might be possible there? Well, there is now, and it's just, I think it's going to be launched later this week, a new initiative from civil society organizations to put forward a model of a common security model for denuclearization in Northeast Asia, which would be a Northeast Asian nuclear weapon-free zone. This picks up on the success of nuclear weapon-free zones in other regions. And a nuclear weapon-free zone is a common security approach because it doesn't call for any one country to unilaterally give up nuclear weapons while being threatened by others. It actually calls for the reduction of the role of nuclear weapons by all of the countries that are involved in that zone. So in the case of Northeast Asia, this would be Japan, South Korea, and North Korea, all giving up the option of being defended by nuclear weapons, whether that's their own nuclear weapons or under extended nuclear deterrence. And in return, they would get security guarantees from China, Russia, and the United States, who are the principal nuclear powers in that region, that they would not use nuclear weapons against those countries. So this is a common security model that has a lot of resonance. It's got cross-party support in Japan. It's got interest also in the cross-party support in the South Korean parliament. The North Koreans are interested. These are the types of ways we should be addressing these, not just a knee-jerk reaction when North Korea does something, there's a militaristic response and vice versa. We need to pursue diplomacy and common security. Thank you.
Exactly. And, part of this, these developments like that deal with UK, Australia, and the US, we see France, which had some kind of a previous deal being taken out of the picture and reacting strongly to that, but it's again a kind of another aspect of a militaristic approach. And so, Jonathan, just wondering if you have thoughts about those things and what Alan said about this framework that could be happening, but I haven't seen anything in the U.S. media about what Alan was just talking about, that framework for security in Asia. What do you think?
The US media intentionally ignores peace, cooperation, and models because it's compromised by the economic interests, but they still go on. And that's really important. But I think what I want to say is Alan speaks from a base of experience that's really important for the audience to understand. He is the visionary who created Parliamentarians for Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament, which I urge him to describe for the audience because it's an example of multi-parties, conservative, progressive, liberal, whatever you want to call them, across the world, working together to change the paradigm. And he did this with virtually no real money. And he did this because the idea is an idea, the time of which has come. Now remember, the modern state was created because of the economic and violent crisis of 17th century Europe, in which Protestants and Catholics were slaughtering each other in massive numbers. And a bunch of people, thoughtful people who said we can do better, got together in the modern state as we know it. Today, the political institutions have become similarly inadequate to address the issues because politicians get elected over local issues. But there are politicians, just as there were then, who went beyond the immediate provincial interest that was facing them and said, we need to look to the future and we can do better. Even though future generations will not support the politicians in the network that Alan has created, nor will voters in other countries, but their conscience has awakened and they're doing that, and they're all over the world. So I want to highlight that the proposals that seem to be very, very ambitious are, because of their good reasoning, particularly in Northeast Asia, are quite possible. And let me finish. One of the members of our parliamentary network was the foreign minister of Japan. And when there were senators in the United States saying to the American people with plenty of access in our media that if there was progress on preventing nuclear testing and progress on nuclear disarmament and arms control, that Japan would become a nuclear weapon state, I went and spoke with the foreign minister and showed him the letters that senators in the United States were circulating in our media. And he said, that's nuts. We are not going to become a nuclear weapon state if there's progress on arms control. But that's what people in our Senate and our Congress were being told by these front men for the military contractors. And I know that the aspiration of that foreign minister of a country under the nuclear umbrella was to make Northeast Asia a nuclear weapons-free zone. And the American people don't know that. So I want people to know that the ideas that Alan is putting forward are grounded in a realism that's very important.
Okay. So Alan, do you want to say something about parliamentarians?
Yeah, well, I do want to thank Jonathan very much for that, because I think there's probably understandable but misplaced cynicism amongst a lot of civil society about the role of parliamentarians and legislators. And I said, it's understandable because there, as Jonathan described, there is a lot of political influence that is impacting legislators' behavior. In order that they be re-elected, they often are pushed into supporting military programs that they may not really believe in, and it subverts the system. But there are many legislators and many parliamentarians who do find ways of working and of taking action according to principle in their heart, and belief in a better world and belief in common security. And that's what we find when Jonathan Granoff and Senator Douglas Roach from Canada invited me to set up a cross-party network of legislators in order to work on those issues. And I emphasize cross-party. We didn't just want to be sort of like a left-wing sort of progressive a lobbying group that sort of just put forward one particular position. We wanted to create a forum where legislators could engage with each other, coming from different perspectives and trying to find common ways forward. So it is a cross-party. We are pretty global. We're in about 90 countries. In the US, our co-president is Senator Ed Markey, who takes forward a lot of key initiatives in the United States. One of our co-presidents from South Asia, Sabir Chowdhury from Bangladesh, who's actually the honorary president of the Interparliamentary Union, which is an organization of 174 parliaments. One of our other co-presidents from Austria is the former president of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, that's Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. And that Parliamentary Assembly has the legislatures of the United States, Canada, all the European countries, Russia, and all the former Soviet countries. What do we have here? We have platforms for parliamentarians to meet, a little like members meeting at the United Nations, where sometimes they will just be putting their party or government perspective, but other times they're actually doing really good behind the scenes, backroom talks, informal discussions, taking forward initiatives and finding solutions to problems and building these solutions on either regional or global scale. So when Jonathan says that the ideas that I've been talking about have a basis, it's because, yes, we have been working on these with policymakers. We know that we can get traction. And even coming back to like the United States, there's been a big division, I know, between Republicans and Democrats within the US political system. But when you meet some of these legislators overseas, including some of the Republicans, at the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, for example, you can actually have a much fresher dialogue and discussion on common security issues that they may not be able to advance publicly back home, but they are actually really interested in. So it's really important, I think, for us as civil society to not just go with the usual suspects, who are in the legislators and the parliaments, but go and talk to the ones who may not agree with us at the moment. We have found that we have changed minds and hearts of legislators through engaging with them in a number of different countries around the world. So even though it seems very difficult to get hope within the United States political structure, it's not hopeless. There are ways of reaching out, there are ways of engaging, and I encourage civil society to do that, and we can help. We have virtually no resources. We don't get funding, and so we basically have to do it. We could say by the sniff of an oily rag, is our New Zealand expression. But we can still have impact through the connections and the people-to-people exchanges that we're creating.
Okay, and as we wind up, Alan, can you give a connection point where people can connect with you and support the work that you're doing? And any last words you want to say, and then we'll go to Jonathan for the same, and then we'll finish up.
Thanks, Rick. I've put PNND, that's the organization, and my email address in the chat box. So anyone who's listening, watching, and here is welcome to follow up on any of those. And no real last words. I think I just mentioned it. Don't fall victim to the cynics. It's good to have good analysis and to understand the problems, but there's always solutions, there's always possibilities, there's always hope. Thank you.
Okay, and so that is pnnd.org, is that correct? For parliamentarians for nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament, correct? Okay, perfect. And Jonathan, any last words? And what would be a contact point? Maybe GSI would be a good contact point.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
gsinstitute.org. But I think people should understand that one of the problems in the advocacy of nuclear weapons is there's not a lot of things individuals can do that are deeply meaningful. Nuclear weapons, unlike, say, addressing climate change, don't involve a basic lifestyle change. They're not local issues. I mean, your city can declare itself a nuclear weapons free zone. All the cities could do that. And there are hundreds of, I think there's 7,000 of them have declared themselves nuclear weapons free zones. But nuclear weapons are produced at a national level. And if you're in a country in which democracy exists, it would behoove you to look at the parliamentarians in your country who are part of PNND and express your support for the policies that they're advancing. But let's look at the ones that are not supporting it. Often it's because they've never even heard of the issue. In the United States, for example, historically, let's look at what Republicans have done on this issue. Richard Nixon unilaterally got rid of the United States biological weapons and became the strongest international leader to obtain the universal abolition of biological weapons. Richard Nixon led in the ratification of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which contains within it an obligation by the nuclear weapon states to negotiate the elimination of nuclear weapons. Richard Nixon initiated the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, which ensured mutual vulnerability of the then Soviet Union and the United States so that nobody would have the incentive to use nuclear weapons first. Ronald Reagan committed to the abolition of nuclear weapons openly and without any equivocation, went so far in his meeting with Mikhail Gorbachev to sign on to a statement that said not only to affirm that nuclear weapons cannot be used because a nuclear war can never be won and thus should never be fought. But in the same paragraph of the statement from Geneva said, we shall not seek military advantage over the other. In other words, rejected the idea that by domination, security is obtained. George Bush Sr. led in the negotiations to obtain a chemical weapons convention. So when people say, oh, this is partisan, that's just not factually true. It is true that many of the Republican Party now seems to have a short-term policy that anything the other party does, they're going to be against. Anything, such as fiscal responsibility, which was a policy, or free trade, which was always a policy of the Republican Party. Once the Democrats adopted that policy, they came out against it. So we have it is not a problem revolving around nuclear weapons. There has been a bipartisan consensus on moving toward a nuclear weapons-free world. That consensus has been broken by literally a crazy cult. So, okay. It's difficult, but it is not partisan. And therefore, it behooves all of us to ask every political leader, what are you doing to protect the climate? Change the framework. Not should you protect the climate, but what are you doing to protect it? What are you doing to get rid of nuclear weapons? It's not your obligation as a citizen to know all the things that Alan and I know about it, because we're wonks on it. But it is your obligation as a citizen to express your values and demand that political leaders find the means of operationalizing them. And nuclear weapons are more of a problem than any problem they seek to solve. And that's as simple as a statement as you can get to your political leader. I think that nuclear weapons are more of a problem themselves than any problem that they seek to solve. We can do better. They're unworthy of civilization, and they're too dangerous. What's your plan to get rid of them? Oh, by the way, the United States has promised to get rid of them in the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And we are supposed to be based on the rule of law. And you can't use a weapon that doesn't discriminate between civilians and combatants. So what are you doing to get rid of them? And three, for the first time in human history, the ability to get rid of poverty is within our grasp, technologically. So instead of spending our time melting the polar ice cap, let's spend our time feeding people. Let's spend our time and economics in creating the conditions where people don't have to leave their countries just to survive in their families. So the question is, what are you doing to eliminate poverty? And poverty is not like the pandemic. If there's extreme poverty in Central America, if you're destroying subsistence farmers by subsidizing the agribusiness in the Midwest, we're going to have people just desperately trying to get to the United States just to survive. We're going to have people in Africa, as we burn the climate, doing anything to get to where they can get food to survive. But the technical ability to solve these problems is in our grasp. So it becomes a moral issue. It is a moral issue. It is a personal issue. Is it right for our tax dollars to be spent in these irrational, mythical, dangerous pursuits? And I ask you, my friend who's watching, is it right for us to be silenced when we know we can and must do better?
Exactly. So as we wind up, I want to invite Jana to join. Please turn your video on, Jana, and we will finish up here. I think you had your three questions, Jonathan, about climate, abolishing nuclear weapons, and ending poverty. And we have three things that I think we accomplished today. And we try to do this on every one of our broadcasts and events. We want to inspire, inform, and involve. which are 3 I's that make a we. So we can go from a me-based society to a we-based society. And I especially want to end this broadcast with the quote that you came up with spontaneously at the launch of our We campaign in 2009 and we.net. I don't know if you remember, but I say it all the time, Jonathan. You said, I hope that we expands so much that there is no longer any them. You remember that?
I live by it as best as I'm able.
That's it. So thank you all. This has been wonderful, and we look forward, connect with we.net for everything else. Oh, and we're doing our party. We're doing our 11 days after party, which is also a benefit for Humanity Rising and We the World.
Rick?
Yes.
I've done several things with Jane Goodall because Jane is very frustrated that it's easier to get people's attention to save chimpanzees, which is very important because God made them very beautiful. And we don't have a right to destroy their homeland and thus destroy them, no question. But it's easier to get people's attention for that than nuclear weapons. And so we didn't have a lot of people. I'm really glad the people that did come. But you have to make an effort to get people's attention to this issue. And I think that Alan's presentation, his slides, and I think that the dialogue that we've had is worth sharing. And I would ask you to make some effort to get it out into the larger media, because I know that if we did, let's celebrate the love we have in our hearts with poetry and music, we'd have a lot more people. But I think that the poetry and music of justice, the poetry and music of caring for future generations, if you get involved in that, it is a very, very sweet song.
That's so beautiful. So you have your call to action, everyone watching this. Please take this video and share it far and wide. You can find it on We the World's YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/wetheworld.org. And many other places. On the Humanity Rising site, you can find this video. And like I said, we're going to have our after party on Wednesday, September 22nd at 8 p.m. Eastern time. So we hope you will join us for that. And also, as Jonathan wants to promote this magazine, Trends in Global Grassroots Organizing, that's at trends.we.net. So there are many ways that you and we can take this forward and create a world that works for all. Thank you again, everyone. Bye-bye.